Chapter 27. The Real Cause of Complaining. I used to be world class at complaining, especially in work situations. This was because I obviously knew better than everyone else. Complaining seemed like the only logical course of action when I was surrounded by people who couldn't see what I see. Of course, complaining never really changed anything, and any pleasure I felt after getting things off my chest was momentary at best. At worst, my complaining would send me into a downward spiral of negativity and overthinking. No, on one level, I knew that complaining wasn't really helpful and that it wouldn't change anything. But I also didn't consciously know what else to do. I had read books and attended courses which advised me to be positive, to look for opportunities instead of negatives. But whenever I found myself in a frustrating situation, it was difficult to change my mind, and I usually defaulted to complaining to whoever would listen. I never really slowed down to examine the real causes behind my complaining. If someone had suggested I do that, the answer would have seemed obvious to me at the time. The cause was the person or situation I was complaining about. But if I had really tried to answer, perhaps even back then, I would have known deep down that this wasn't 100% true. I remember complaining to a colleague about a line manager I once had. To my surprise, my colleague thought the line manager wasn't that bad. Of course, if the line manager was the cause of my complaining, then surely everyone would see what I saw. He was the problem. But since this wasn't the case, I rationalized it that my colleague didn't report to this same line manager. However, after I changed jobs, the next person who worked for the same manager got on great with him. Well, I thought, maybe people are subjective. They can treat everyone differently. So maybe there really was something about that line manager that made him challenging for me in particular. But what about circumstances? I remember once going through a period of organizational change. The company I worked for was undergoing a reorganization, which meant that some people would lose their jobs. The first time I went through this, I felt scared and insecure. And I complained about anything I could think of: not being given enough information, the process taking too long, the specific procedures, and so on. A few years later, going through another reorganization, I was hoping to be made redundant. Same situation, different reactions to it. I came to see that complaining is simply a result of misunderstanding, as are so many of the problems we deal with, and which I keep pointing to throughout this book. If I think that a line manager, reorganization, or the economy has the power to make me feel bad, then complaining seems justified. However, if my mind doesn't work that way, then complaining makes little or no sense. These days, I see that I complain far less than I used to a few years ago. This hasn't been because of a conscious effort to stop complaining, but simply through dropping my misunderstandings about how the mind works. Once I realize that the way I'm feeling is dependent on my own thinking, I'm less inclined to look outside of myself for the source of any problems, and instead look to change what's going on inside me. Complaining won't help that. I still do complain from time to time, because again, I see that there is never an exception to complaining being a result of a misunderstanding. If I truly see, in the moment, that my reality is created from thought and not by another person or outside circumstance, then complaining simply can't occur. It wouldn't make sense to complain. If the economy crashed, I could simply get on and deal with whatever I needed to deal with without complaining. If my friend is acting in a certain way that I don't appreciate, I might complain. If, on the other hand, I see that how they are acting has no power to make me feel a certain way, I won't complain. I might talk to them about their behavior. I might listen and be a great friend to them. I'd probably get curious about their behavior. Complaining, however, would simply not make sense. This is really helpful in my work with my coaching clients who may complain in our sessions about their spouse, their job, or a politician. Knowing how the mind works, I can gently point them to the misunderstandings behind their complaining, which are always fresh new thinking to arise for them. Often, what they were complaining about becomes a non issue, or they see a very clear solution to whatever challenge they were facing. Where are you complaining in your life? And is it possible that it's a result of misunderstanding? How would it feel to let that go? Crikey. Do you know the thing that really strikes me about this chapter, apart from complaining, because I grew up in um, a house where um, there was a lot of complaining. So yeah, I feel like I could write a book just on complaining actually, and I've been really um, guilty in the past of complaining a lot as well, particularly if things don't go my way. People aren't seeing things the way I see them, which obviously I think is right. Then yeah, I can do the complaining game too. But I'm seeing that really differently actually reading this chapter. And then there's one other thing that I wanted to share with you, and it's this paragraph here. And Kush says this: These days, I see that I complain far less than I used to a few years ago. This hasn't been because of a conscious effort to stop complaining, but simply through dropping my misunderstandings about how the mind works. Now, what I want to point to there is the implication of that. This book isn't about taking this understanding and then spending hours and hours going over your life looking for where you're misunderstanding so you can feel badly or be cross with yourself or see where other people are misunderstanding and be cross with them. It really isn't that. It's simpler and it's more subtle actually. By removing misunderstanding, we realign to our natural true nature, our true loving nature, our ability to be kind, to be thoughtful, to be helpful. You don't have to work at these things. They're just an implication of what happens when you take misunderstandings out of the mind. So you really can just enjoy this process. That was the whole point really of reading this book with you was to help you see that you can evolve in a simple, easy, and effortless way. It doesn't have to be hard work. You don't have to give yourself a hard time. You keep looking at your understanding of how the mind works, and the rest takes care of itself. See you in the next chapter.